Welcome to Washington Today on C-SPAN Radio for Thursday, April 28th, 2022. U.S. economy shrinks in the first quarter of the year, 1.4% annual rate, first economic contraction in 2 years, dating back to the start of the COVID-19 pandemic. But consumer spending and business investment remain strong, and President Joe Biden says he's not concerned about a recession. We'll talk about it with a Wall Street Journal reporter. House and Senate Democratic leaders promising votes on a plan to reduce gas prices by giving federal and state regulators more power to go after oil companies for charging excessive prices, something known as price gouging. To help Ukraine continue its fight against Russia's invasion, President Biden asking Congress for another $33 billion in military and economic aid for Ukraine. And the U.S. House approves a bill to expand President Biden's authority to send military aid to Ukraine through a program most known for aiding Great Britain against Germany in World War II, Lend-Lease. The Senate already passed this bill, so it now heads to the President's desk for his signature. Homeland Security Secretary Alejandro Mayorkas back before a House committee and getting more questions about immigration. Some Republicans raising the possibility of impeaching the Secretary over his handling of the U.S.-Mexico border. And the chair of the Congressional Progressive Caucus strongly supporting repealing Title 42, that public health law that has turned away 1 million migrants seeking asylum on public health grounds, preventing the spread of COVID-19. But the getting rid of it, scheduled for the end of May, on hold due to a court ruling. And the FDA proposes a ban on menthol cigarettes and flavored cigars. From the Associated Press, the U.S. economy shrank last quarter for the first time since the pandemic recession struck 2 years ago, contracting at a 1.4% annual rate, but consumers and businesses kept spending in a sign of economic durability. The economy overall declined. The January to March quarter does not mean a recession is likely in the coming months. Most economists expect a rebound this quarter as solid hiring and wage gains sustain growth. That from AP. That's also how President Joe Biden viewed it. As a reporter asked him about it today, it was a Commerce Department report on the GDP.
Sir, how concerned are you about a recession, given the GDP report today showed a contraction of 1.4% in the fourth quarter?
Well, I'm not concerned about a recession. And, I mean, you're always concerned about a recession, but the GDP, fell to 1.4%. But here's the deal. We also had last quarter consumer spending and business investment and residential investment increased at significant rates, both for leisure as well as hard products. Number one. Number two, unemployment is the lowest rate since 1970. A record 4.5 million businesses were created last year. We're in a situation where we have a very different view than Senator Scott of Republicans who want to raise taxes on the middle-class families and want to include half the small business owners in that. So I think what you're seeing is enormous growth in the country that was affected by everything from COVID and the COVID blockages that occurred along the way. Now, you always have to take a look, and no one is predicting a recession now. Some are predicting there may be a recession in 2023. I'm concerned about it, but I know one thing, that if our Republican friends are really interested in doing something about dealing with the economic growth, and they should help us continue to lower the deficit, which we've done last year with $350 billion. They should be willing to work with us to have a tax code that is actually one that works and everybody pays their fair share. And they should be in a position where you shouldn't be raising taxes on middle-class folks. You should be raising taxes on people who everyone acknowledges, and the vast majority of Republicans aren't paying their fair share. I've said it 100 times. You have 50 major corporations of the Fortune 500 companies made $40 billion last year, didn't pay a single penny. No one under our proposal, making their $400,000 a year, will see a penny in their taxes go up, not one penny.
President Biden taking reporters' questions at the White House. The president mentioning Senator Rick Scott, Republican from Florida, who has put out a multi-point plan. It covers many topics, an agenda for the election year. And a White House document on small businesses released today also mentioning Senator Scott and taxes. The president referenced that. That document says that Senator Scott's plan would increase taxes on almost 50% of small business owners nationally and over 80% of small business owners earning less than $50,000. Senator Scott tweeting today, "The numbers don't lie. More bad news for hardworking families. Inflation plus 8.5%, GDP minus 1.4%. And Rick Scott goes on, President Biden's administration can keep lying about the economy, but Floridians know the true damage Biden's reckless tax and spend agenda is causing. Also, reaction to the GDP report showing the economy contracting in the first quarter from the Senate Minority Leader Mitch McConnell, Republican from Kentucky, on the Senate floor.
Runaway inflation is crushing working American families on Democrats' watch. The share of Americans who say the economy is our most important problem hasn't been this high since the last time Democrats controlled the White House. Just this morning, we got a devastating quarterly GDP report. The economy actually shrank 1.4% over the last 3 months. No longer are Democrats just presiding over a disappointing recovery. Now they've thrown the recovery into reverse, and we're actually going backward. We haven't seen inflation this bad in more than 40 years. Month after month of skyrocketing prices. It's exactly what everyone knew would happen if Democrats dumped $2 trillion in printed money on an economy that was already ready for a comeback. But Democrats rammed through the far-left spending, so working Americans are paying dearly. This week, the same Washington Democrats who drove this inflation have finally figured out their response. They want to raise taxes on the American people.
Senate Republican leader Mitch McConnell on the Senate floor. Wall Street Journal article by Sarah Chaney Cambon, labor economics reporter, begins. The U.S. economy shrank in the first quarter as supply disruptions weighed on output and masked underlying strength in consumer and business spending that suggested growth will resume soon. And she joins us now. Thank you for being here. You know, the word blip is appearing in many news reports today. Is that what economists think is happening here?
Today's report was somewhat of an anomaly or a head fake. Consumer spending is the economy's main driver. If people are going out to restaurants and stores and spending money, then that's really good. And consumer spending was strong in the first quarter. So today's headline number, which was actually a contraction in GDP, was somewhat misleading. The fundamentals are pretty strong.
We go from 6.9% growth to 1.4% shrinkage, a bit of a roller coaster. That's not something we've seen lately in the economy.
Right. So the first quarter marked the weakest GDP number that we've seen since spring of 2020. And that's when COVID-19 hit and lots of businesses shut down. Consumers were oftentimes hesitant to go out, and the economy just went into a pretty deep but short recession. Over the past year and a half or so, we've seen the economy growing and recovering from that recession. And so today's number was pretty different from what we've seen in recent quarters.
President Biden and Congress have been focusing on dealing with the supply chain disruptions and also inflation. Does the outlook, as we talked about from the economists today, that the recovery will continue, does that suggest that they think that the lawmakers are getting a handle on this?
So far, we've seen that inflation still remains high. In the CPI report, inflation was over 8%, which is a 4-decade high. And so clearly supply chain disruptions and kind of an imbalance between consumer demand and the supply of goods and services available is still triggering inflation. The Federal Reserve is raising interest rates pretty quickly this year to try to tame inflation. Economists have different views over how successful the Fed will be in doing that.
Now, Fed Chair Powell says he may actually speed up the increase in interest rates to tame inflation. Given today's report, will that continue?
Right. So today's report actually showed that private demand in the first quarter grew at a 3.7% annual rate, which is above the 1.8% growth rate the Fed expects for the overall economy over the long run. So in other words, the report showed that the economy might actually be growing too fast. And so it's really unlikely to change the Fed's plans to raise interest rates at a pretty rapid pace.
Sarah Chaney Cambon is a labor economics reporter at the Wall Street Journal. Find her story at WSJ.com. Thank you very much.
Thanks so much for having me, Michael.
Wall Street today, the Dow up 614, NASDAQ up 103, S&P up 382. From Fox News, the Democratic leadership in the House and Senate said they will bring legislation to a vote to police big oil companies for price gouging as historically high gas costs continue to dog Democrats' midterm chances. And that's from Fox News. House Speaker Nancy Pelosi and the Senate Majority Leader Chuck Schumer said they want the legislation to address price gouging and market manipulation sometime soon. The Fox News article says, though, the details and dates were not revealed. Here's the speaker at the news conference.
There is an ongoing challenge to us that the American people understand very clearly, and that is that big oil has profiteered in this, has exploited the marketplace. This past year, what the report is, they've made over $200 billion in profits. You talked about that on the floor of the Senate yesterday. I'm sure you will hear today. But they are hoarding the windfall while keeping prices high for people at the pump. In this time of war, at any time, there's no excuse for big oil companies to profiteer, to price gouge, or exploit families. That is why Democrats are moving forward with forceful action that will stop and hold accountable oil and gas companies for profiteering and manipulating markets. This is a top priority for all of us. The House and Senate are putting together our bills, led by Mr. Pallone in the House and Chairwoman Cantwell in the Senate. We are confident that what we pass will be signed by the president, we think, and will be strong, tough, and effective. We are laser focused on lowering costs at the pump and across the board, not just at the pump.
House Speaker Nancy Pelosi, Democrat from California, a news conference along with, as she said, Congressman Frank Pallone, Democrat from New Jersey, the chair of the Energy and Commerce Committee. And on the Senate side, the Senate Majority Leader Chuck Schumer, Democrat from New York, and Senator Maria Cantwell, Democrat from Washington State, who chairs the Energy Committee in the Senate. More from the Fox News article, the legislation would not suspend the federal government's 18.4 cent a gallon gas tax. Instead, the lawmakers said they will give the Federal Trade Commission and state attorneys general more power, including civil penalty authority, to go after oil companies and retailers that are gouging their customers in both wholesale and retail sales. There was a reporter's question to Speaker Pelosi and Majority Leader Chuck Schumer about that proposal of a gas tax holiday.
Madam Speaker, Leader, and Senator Cantwell, can you just tell us where things stand with respect to the federal gas tax holiday? Is this part of this legislative package? Are you planning to move forward with that? Where do things stand?
What we're putting forth is what we talked about today. There is some interest. There had been some interest in the holiday. The pros of it are that it's good PR. You're asking about it. The cons are that there's no guarantee that the reduction in the federal tax that would be passed on to the consumer. We have now evidence to think that the oil companies would pass that on to the consumer. At the same time, it has to be covered. We have to pay for it because the money would come out of the Highway Trust Fund, and we can't have that shortfall there. So we'd have to pay for it. So the question is it worth having to go get money to return to cover the shortfall in the trust fund in order to give a break to the big oil companies.
If you ask the American people and all the survey data, what is causing the increase in gas prices? Number one is market manipulation and big oil not giving a break. That is what we're focusing on.
Senate Majority Leader Chuck Schumer and House Speaker Nancy Pelosi, a news conference on Capitol Hill. They said as soon as that legislation is ready, they will be bringing it to the House and Senate floors for votes. Average price of gasoline in the United States, according to gasprices.AAA.com, $4.14 a gallon. That is up $1.25 from a year ago, but down 10 cents from a month ago. Energy Secretary Jennifer Granholm also asked about gasoline prices today at a U.S. House Energy and Commerce Subcommittee hearing that was primarily looking at the Energy Department's budget request for the next fiscal year. Republican Congressman Gary Palmer of Alabama focusing on increased domestic energy production in order to bring down prices.
There's a city in my district, Clanton, Alabama. We estimate they consume about people buy about 60,000 gallons of gas, in the city. When you consider that in December of 2020, gas prices had gone up $2 a gallon over what they were paying then, that's $120,000 that small town no longer has to be spent in the local grocery stores and their local businesses, on entertainment. These people aren't saving that money anymore. Does that concern you?
Absolutely, it concerns me.
Why are you pushing policies that are making life miserable for people? You have the power to unleash American energy, and I see you've got that American-Lithuanian flag on your lapel.
Ukrainian,
I'm sorry. I've been in contact with people on the ground and the government over there, and I spoke to you directly about them asking that you unleash what is probably right now the most powerful weapon in the arsenal of democracy. That's American energy.
So, number one, totally agree with your concern about the price of gas. I think you're completely right to focus on that because it is hurting people. The administration is very concerned about this too. Administrations across the world are concerned because the price of oil, which gas comes from, is traded on a global market.
I work
right
in
now,
engineering, so I know.
Well, so right now, Russia's actions have taken oil off the market. Yes, sir.
No,
it has taken 1.5 million barrels off the market because countries like the United States have rightfully said, we will not finance this war. Countries like Canada have said, we will not finance this war.
Members of your party, my Democrat colleagues, held a hearing last October, called the CEO of Exxon a liar, and demanded that they reduce production. We had a hearing just a few weeks ago in this committee and accused them of reducing production so that they could increase prices. You can't have it both ways. I worked in engineering. I have a pretty good understanding about how this works and what it costs to get gas, to get oil out of the ground, get it to a refinery, turn it into gasoline, and sell it to the public. And what this administration is doing and what your agency is doing is not doing the things they need to do to open up these resources, which would not only bring down the price of energy, but would help defeat Russia in Ukraine.
With respect, sir, the talking points are not accurate.
Yes,
we have done everything we can to encourage the oil and gas community to increase supply at this moment. We've called upon them to do it. We have issued more permits under this administration.
Demanded they reduce production last October, and then
under this administration, right now there is a concern about supply because of the war. The war has caused prices to escalate.
Prices
yes, sir,
by
pulling oil off the market. I understand that's not what you want to believe, but the truth is, and if you ask any oil executive,
you're misleading the American public.
It doesn't involve.
You're misleading the American public. I yield back.
Congressman Gary Palmer, Republican from Alabama, questioning the Energy Secretary Jennifer Granholm at today's Energy and Commerce Subcommittee on Energy hearing. You can find the full hearing at our website at cspan.org, our video library. This is Washington Today. Food and Drug Administration announcing a proposed rule today to ban menthol cigarettes and flavored cigars. Associated Press writes that menthol accounts for more than a third of cigarettes sold in the United States, and the mint flavor is overwhelmingly favored by black smokers and young people. The FDA Commissioner, Dr. Robert Califf, testifying today before House Appropriations Subcommittee.
Before I close, I want to flag an issue I know is of keen interest to this subcommittee. I'm pleased to announce that this morning FDA will issue two proposed tobacco standards, one prohibiting menthol as a characterizing flavor in cigarettes, and another prohibiting characterizing flavors other than tobacco in cigars. Through careful consideration of the scientific evidence and our authorities under the Tobacco Control Act, we've determined that these actions are appropriate for protection of the public health. The proposed product standards would, among other things, improve the health and reduce the mortality risk of current smokers of menthol cigarettes or flavored cigars by substantially decreasing their consumption and increasing the likelihood of cessation. This is another important move forward in the agency's efforts to combat youth tobacco use and promote health equity, and we look forward to working with Congress and the public as we seek feedback on our proposed standards.
The FDA Commissioner, Dr. Robert Califf, before a House Appropriations Subcommittee that oversees the FDA budget today. More from the Associated Press article. Menthol is the only cigarette flavor that was not prohibited under the 2009 law that gave the FDA authority over tobacco products, an exemption negotiated by industry lobbyists. The act did, though, instruct the agency to continue to weigh a ban. At today's White House briefing with Press Secretary Jen Psaki, she was asked how the actions might affect African Americans.
Some black community activists, the ACLU, members of the CDC have raised concerns that it could push more of the illicit market, which would lead to racially profiling black smokers. Can this administration assure that won't happen?
Absolutely, because this rule would go after manufacturers and people who sell, not individuals who smoke menthol cigarettes, and it would save lives. I'd also note that the NAACP put out a statement saying for decades the tobacco industry has been targeting African Americans and have contributed to the skyrocketing rates of heart disease, stroke, and cancer across our community. The tobacco industry is on a narrow quest for profit, and they have been killing us along the way. The NAACP has been calling for a ban on menthol cigarettes and flavored e-cigarettes for years now, and we applaud the FDA's plan. But what we're talking about here is these rules are estimated that eliminating menthol in tobacco products could prevent up to 654,000 deaths over the next 40 years and up to 238,000 deaths among African Americans. But this is not about going after individuals smoking menthol cigarettes. This is about manufacturers and people who are selling them.
The White House Press Secretary Jen Psaki with reporters in the White House briefing room. A Fox News article on this issue has this paragraph. Notably, state and local law enforcement agencies do not independently enforce the federal Food, Drug, and Cosmetic Act and do not and cannot take enforcement actions against any violation of FDA's tobacco authorities, including its regulations on the FDA's behalf. Washington Today continues in a minute.
The White House Correspondents' Dinner returns on April 30th with the first appearance by a president since 2016, President Joe Biden. He'll probably tell jokes, and no doubt there will be jokes about him, like this one Barack Obama told at the dinner in 2009, his first as president.
All this change hasn't been easy. Change never is. So I've cut the tension by bringing a new friend to the White House. He's warm, he's cuddly, loyal, enthusiastic. You just have to keep him on a tight leash. Every once in a while he goes charging off in the wrong direction and gets himself into trouble. But enough about Joe Biden.
Hear more jokes about Joe Biden from Barack Obama and comedians who have entertained at the annual White House Correspondents' Dinner, and hear jokes Joe Biden himself has told in this special all-comedy episode of C-SPAN's podcast, The Weekly. C-SPAN's The Weekly. Find it and follow wherever you listen to podcasts.
Welcome back to Washington Today, available as a podcast on the free C-SPAN Now mobile video app and wherever you get your podcasts. A few more headlines. Congressman Benny Thompson, Democrat from Mississippi and chair of the House Select Committee investigating the January 6, 2021 attack on the U.S. Capitol, telling reporters that the committee will be holding 8 hearings throughout the month of June. He said the hearings will be a mixture of some prime time and some regular, and they will tell the story about what happened. He said at this point, the first hearing will be June 9th, although he said it's not finalized. But C-SPAN will be covering those hearings as they proceed. And Moderna asking the Food and Drug Administration to authorize its COVID vaccine for children ages 6 months to 5 years old. If approved, it would be the first vaccine available for this age group. The COVID vaccine from Moderna, according to a press release from the company, was 51% effective against infection from the Omicron variant in children under 2 years old, about 37% effective for 2 to 5-year-old kids. And the chief medical officer of the company said those levels are similar to the 2-dose protection for adults. President Joe Biden on Thursday, writes CNN, asked Congress for a $33 billion supplemental funding bill aimed at supporting Ukraine over the next several months as Russia's brutal and unrelenting war enters a new phase. They write the size and scope of the president's latest proposed package comes as the administration prepares to provide long-term support to Ukraine as Russia's invasion of the nation stretches into its 3rd month, and that it's more than twice as much as the $13.6 billion infusion of military and humanitarian aid that Congress approved last month. President Biden spoke from the White House.
I just signed a request to Congress for critical security, economic, and humanitarian assistance to help Ukraine continue to counter Putin's aggression, and at a very pivotal moment. We need this bill to support Ukraine in this fight for freedom, and our NATO allies, our EU partners, they're going to pay their fair share of the cost as well, but we have to do this. We have to do our part as well, leading the alliance. The cost of this fight is not cheap, but caving to aggression is going to be more costly if we allow it to happen. We either back Ukrainian people as they defend their country, or we stand by as the Russians continue their atrocities and aggression in Ukraine. Every day the Ukrainians pay for the price, and the price they pay is with their lives for this fight. So we need to contribute arms, funding, ammunition, and the economic support to make their courage and sacrifice have purpose so they can continue this fight and do what they're doing. It's critical this funding gets approved and approved as quickly as possible. You know, long before Russia launched its brutal invasion, I made clear how the United States would respond. Predicted they would invade, and they surely did. We said we'd not send U.S. troops to fight Russian troops in Ukraine, but we would provide robust military assistance and try to unify the Western world against Russia's aggression. I said I would impose powerful sanctions on Russia, and that we destroy this myth that somehow they can continue to move without the rest of the world acting. That we deploy additional forces to defend NATO territories, particularly in the east along the Russian and Belarus borders. That's exactly what we said we would do, and we did. But despite the disturbing rhetoric coming out of the Kremlin, the facts are plain for everybody to see. We're not attacking Russia. We're helping Ukraine defend itself against Russian aggression. And just as Putin chose to launch this brutal invasion, he could make the choice to end this brutal invasion.
President Biden speaking from the White House Roosevelt Room. He also outlined a proposal that would further pressure Russian oligarchs over the war in Ukraine, including using money from their seized assets to fund Ukraine's defense. And President Biden made another push for a separate supplemental spending proposal he has sent to Congress for COVID-19 programs. Defense News reports that the Senate Majority Leader Chuck Schumer intimated after the Democratic Caucus weekly luncheon on Tuesday that he would double down on his proposal from earlier this month to pair the additional Ukraine assistance supplemental with an international COVID aid package. And the Senate Minority Leader Mitch McConnell telling reporters his party would likely continue to hold up passage of the coronavirus relief package and, by extension, any potential Ukraine supplemental included in that legislation unless they get votes on blocking President Biden's reported plans to repeal the pandemic-related immigration provision known as Title 42. That from Defense News. AP article on the war in Ukraine reads that Moscow's offensive in eastern Ukraine gathered momentum as several areas came under heavy shelling Thursday. Amid suspicions, Russian President Vladimir Putin wants to score a major battlefield success in time for Victory Day, one of Russia's proudest holidays, on May 9th. U.S. Defense Secretary Lloyd Austin asked about getting heavy weapons to the Ukrainians in the east and whether they can get there in time. Austin hosting the Canadian Defense Minister at the Pentagon.
Well, given the inherent and significant advantages that the Russian forces have in the Donbass, including simple mass, I'm wondering, how can you get enough heavy weaponry to that area quickly enough to make a decisive difference?
Well, absolutely. Bob, that's what we've actually been focused on, and that was really a key element in the meeting that we conducted on Tuesday. We need to not only to get capability there to them quickly, it needs to be the right kind of capability. And so what will be decisive in this next fight is long-range fires. And as we interact with the Chad and the Minister of Defense on a routine basis, these are the kinds of things that they are requesting. They believe that long-range fires will be key in their efforts going forward. And so we are moving as quickly as we possibly can to provide them those capabilities. And I would point out to you, and I think you know this, but the President signed a package of $800 million on Thursday. On Saturday, the first howitzer from that package showed up at the airfield. And so that's the speed of war that we're operating at. And we've encouraged our allies and partners to work with us to move as quickly as we possibly can.
Defense Secretary Lloyd Austin taking reporters' questions at a news conference at the Pentagon, a joint news conference with a visiting Canadian Minister of Defense. The Hill newspaper writes the U.S. House passed legislation on Thursday establishing a Lend-Lease program to make it easier for the U.S. to send military aid to Ukraine, with the measure now headed to President Biden for his signature. The Ukrainian Democracy Defense Lend-Lease Act would make it easier to get military aid to Ukraine as it defends itself against Russia's invasion, which has entered its third month. The bill passed by a vote of 417 to 10, with all 10 no votes coming from Republicans. Part of the House floor debate, Congressman Jamie Raskin, Democrat from Maryland.
This act is rooted in the Lend-Lease program of World War II, which President Roosevelt proposed in January of 1941, and which allowed our government to lend or to lease war supplies and equipment to any nation whose security was defined as vital to the defense and the security of the United States. Passage of that act enabled Great Britain and Winston Churchill to keep fighting and to survive the fascist Nazi bombardment until the United States could enter the war. President Zelensky has said that Ukraine needs weapons to sustain themselves, and President Biden has answered that call with billions in military assistance since Russia's full-blown invasion began on February 24th, a day that will live in infamy in the freedom-loving world. On April 21, last Thursday, President Biden announced that we will be sending an additional $800 million in military aid to Ukraine, the 8th such installment, which will include 72 howitzers, 144,000 artillery rounds, 72 tactical vehicles, and more than 120 Phoenix Ghost tactical drones. And today I understand President Biden has asked for an additional aid package for the next several months. But S-3522 will streamline current legal authorities under the Arms Export Control Act that allows our government to lend defense articles needed to defend civilian populations. So we will eliminate red tape to make it easier for our government to lend or lease necessary military equipment in this struggle to defend Ukraine.
Congressman Jamie Raskin, Democrat from Maryland, on the House floor. The House passing this bill. Again, the vote was 417 to 10. The 10 noes coming from Republicans. The Senate had passed the legislation by voice vote, so it now heads to President Biden for his signature into law, expected signature. From AFP, 2 missiles have slammed into a district close to Kyiv's CBD as United Nations Secretary General Antonio Guterres was meeting Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky on Thursday. They write it's a brazen act from Moscow, given the head of the UN could have been harmed in the attack. Mr. Guterres had held talks with Russian President Vladimir Putin just yesterday. Back to Washington, Secretary of State Antony Blinken asked about the war while testifying before the House Foreign Affairs Committee. The ranking Republican Michael McCall from Texas, focusing on lessons from arming Ukraine against Russian aggression when it comes to possibly supporting Taiwan against possible Chinese aggression.
You know, I've been critical that more weapons didn't go in before the invasion. It seemed to be waiting till after the invasion. I will say I was at the Polish-Ukraine border last week, and I was actually very pleased to see a lot of 18-wheelers going in, and we know what they were carrying. But Zelensky said if we had access to all the weapons we need, which our partners have and which are comparable to the weapons used by the Russian Federation, we would have already ended this war. I don't think we can afford to make the same mistakes, though, in Taiwan. The stakes are high. They make 90% of advanced semiconductor chips. If the CCP controlled, they take Taiwan, they could weaponize the semiconductor supply chain and decimate the United States economy. A CCP-controlled Taiwan would give China a physical base in the first island chain that would cut the U.S. off from our allies and put us at a strategic disadvantage to future aggression, and I already talked about the Solomon Islands and that security agreement. My question, very quickly, the chairman and I do sign off on foreign military weapon sales. We sent a letter, a joint letter, to you on December the 3rd of last year. There are about 10 weapon systems. I won't go into detail on all of them, but all very important. When I met the ambassador from Taiwan, she said, I have not received any of these. I think deterrence is important here. And we wrote to request notification of the pending shipment of these sales to Taiwan. Why is this being held up? Many of these were signed off by the chairman and myself 2 years ago.
Thank you. Let me just very quickly address Ukraine and then come quickly to your question. First on Ukraine, again, with great appreciation for everything that you've done, that the chairman has done and continue to do, and we've got to keep doing together. The reason that the Ukrainians were able so effectively to push back the Russians from their aggression against Kyiv and the surrounding areas and push them back to the east and the south is 2 things. One, starting with their remarkable courage and resilience, which the Russians underestimated and probably the entire world did. But 2, because they actually had in hand, in the moment, the tools they needed to do it. And the reason that they had those tools in hand is because, among other things, President Biden engaged in a drawdown way back in Labor Day of last year, another one Christmas time. These things were not. And
I got 2 minutes, and I have one more question for you.
So I just wanted to make that.
When will Taiwan receive these weapons?
So on Taiwan, 2 things. I agree with you that it is vital that Taiwan continue to have the means to defend itself because we've seen mounting aggression.
That's Secretary of State Antony Blinken getting questions from Congressman Michael McCall, ranking member on the Foreign Affairs Committee. You can find the full hearing at cspan.org. And this is Washington Today. From BuzzFeed News, a judge on Wednesday temporarily blocked the Biden administration from winding down a Trump-era policy that quickly expels immigrants at the border and blocks them from accessing the U.S. asylum system. The temporary restraining order, which stops the administration from implementing a gradual ending of the policy known as Title 42, was issued by the judge who's a Trump appointee. A hearing on a longer-term block on the repeal of Title 42 set for May 13th. The Biden administration earlier announced it planned to end Title 42 on May 23rd. And today, a reporter asking President Biden what happens now.
Title 42, a number of your Democratic friends are pressuring the White House to maintain that policy. Can you give us a straight answer whether you're going to heed that request or you're going to get rid of it?
I can give you a straight answer. We had proposed to eliminate that policy by the end of May. The court has said we can't so far. And what the court says we're going to do. The court could come along and say we cannot do that, and that's it.
President Biden at the White House. Some other Democratic lawmakers support the repeal of Title 42's application to immigration. Again, Title 42, an emergency health measure. In this case, it was an attempt to stop the spread of COVID-19. Congresswoman Pramila Jayapal, Democrat from Washington State, chairs the Congressional Progressive Caucus, and she led a news conference with other House Democrats outside the U.S. Capitol.
Today, we are here together to reinforce our complete support for the Biden administration's decision to lift Title 42. Let me be clear. The application of Title 42 by the Trump administration was a cruel, racist, and counterproductive use of health policy to circumvent existing immigration law. It has harmed millions of people who are escaping war and poverty and famine. Title 42 should never have been put in place. The language of Title 42 is quite clear in its wording. It focuses on the danger of introduction of a communicable disease into the United States, but in fact, by the time Title 42 was put in place, COVID was already here, infecting, hospitalizing, and killing our people because the administration at that time, the Trump administration, was still fighting testing and mask mandates and social distancing, real public health measures in America that would have done far more to prevent the spread of the virus than the implementation of Title 42. Notably, Title 42 was not pushed by public health experts. In fact, public health experts wrote a long letter, dozens of them, saying that Title 42 should not have been put in place. It was rather instigated by Stephen Miller, Trump's chief anti-immigrant architect, who was hell-bent on eliminating all legal pathways into the United States. So the dubious public health rationale for Title 42 became an overt national immigration and border security strategy that essentially overturned current immigration law and takes away the legal rights enshrined in domestic and international law that migrants have to seek safety and asylum here in the United States.
Congresswoman Pramila Jayapal, Democrat from Washington State, chair of the Congressional Progressive Caucus, a news conference on the grounds of the U.S. Capitol building. A new report from the conservative group FAIR, which stands for Federation for American Immigration Reform, it advocates for lower levels of immigration, finds that in the first year of the Biden administration, the number of illegal immigrants in the United States increased by about 1 million, from 14.5 million to 15.5 million, and they estimate the net fiscal burden of illegal immigrants on the economy is $143 billion, and that's up $9 billion in that first year of the Biden administration. Immigration also a prime topic as Homeland Security Secretary Alejandro Mayorkas testified before the House Judiciary Committee today. Here are the questions from Congressman Ken Buck, Republican from Colorado.
Secretary Mayorkas, Americans are mad, and they are particularly mad at you. In fact, even President Biden had to appoint the vice president to help you do your job. When I listen to the constituents in my district, they believe you have intentionally made our border less secure. When I listen to my colleagues, they believe you have acted intentionally to make the border less secure. My constituents distinguish between your actions and the actions of other Biden administration officials. Americans are mad at Secretary Austin, for example, because he removed military personnel for not taking the COVID vaccine. Americans are mad that the Biden administration reduced oil and gas production, and we see the result at the pump. There are a number of bad policies from the Biden White House, but Americans believe what you've done is intentional. You've stopped the building of the wall that deterred illegal immigrants from coming to this country. You've terminated asylum cooperative agreements with Guatemala, El Salvador, and Nicaragua. You're trying to revoke Title 42. You are funding organizations that work in foreign countries to encourage illegal immigrants to come to America. The result is the largest increase in illegal immigration in the history of the United States. You've allowed thousands of pounds of fentanyl to come into this country. Fentanyl overdose is now the leading cause of death for adults between the ages of 18 and 45. You're responsible for thousands of young girls being forced into prostitution in this country. The Americans I speak to believe you have intentionally undermined the mission of the Department of Homeland Security, that mission being to ensure a safe, secure, and prosperous homeland.
To safeguard our people, our homeland, and our values.
There you go. American parents are frustrated that their kids can't get an education because half of the students in the elementary schools where their kids go are monolingual Spanish-speaking kids that require additional care, and that care is coming from their kids' classrooms. Americans are mad that their relatives with serious medical conditions are waiting in line at the emergency room, being used by illegal immigrants to treat common ailments. American workers are mad that their wages are being suppressed by the mass influx of laborers. Many of my constituents have asked me whether you will be impeached when Republicans gain control next year. They don't believe that you've committed a high crime, and they don't believe that you've committed a misdemeanor. My constituents want you impeached because they believe you've committed treason. They believe you're a traitor. They compare you to Benedict Arnold. You know, no parent with the last name Arnold names their kid Benedict. They wonder, what will the Mayorkas family do down the road? Secretary Mayorkas, I was at an event this past weekend, and a lady approached me and asked me if you felt any shame for what you've done to this country. My question for you, Secretary Mayorkas, is very simple. Would you please answer that lady's question? Are you ashamed for what you've done to this country?
Congressman, I have so much to say.
You got a minute and 17 seconds to say it.
In response to what you have just said, it is so profoundly offensive on so many different levels, in so many different regards. I won't ask you for an apology.
Don't.
I won't. But let me share with you just quite succinctly. I am incredibly proud of my service to this country. It is more than 20 years of service in the civilian corps, as a federal prosecutor, and as a member of the Department of Homeland Security. I am immensely proud to work alongside the selfless, dedicated, and talented 250,000 personnel of the Department of Homeland Security in the service of the American people, to secure our homeland, to secure them, and to secure our values. That is my response.
Homeland Security Secretary Alejandro Mayorkas, questioned by Congressman Ken Buck, Republican from Colorado, during today's House Judiciary Committee hearing. A little more from the report from that group, FAIR, Federation for American Immigration Reform. Again, it does advocate lower immigration levels, and it estimates that there are 15.5 million illegal immigrants or undocumented immigrants in the United States today. They say the states with the most, California, 3.3 million, Texas, 2.2 million, Florida, 1.2 million, and New York, 1.1 million. And with the least, North Dakota and West Virginia, about 6,000 each. Thanks for listening to Washington Today. You can get more of Washington's top stories sent to your inbox each day with C-SPAN's evening newsletter, Word for Word. You can subscribe at c-span.org/connect. Have a good night.